Lord bless you guys. We're so happy. We're just going to wait a few minutes to let some more friends hop in here. John Saunders is there, and Papa Joy is there with us. Laura, Leanne, and the list grows. Hi, Linda. Good. Michael Hendricks, hello. So good. Richard Murphy. Oh, good. And the list just continues to grow. All righty. So good, so good. Well, guys, well, I'm sure there'll be other people joining us, but we are so glad that you're joining us today. This is our second webinar for the presentation of Dr. Jim Wilder's trilogy that he's written of Growing a More Human Community. And so, hello, Dr. Wilder, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Trilogy, that sounds very impressive right there. So
It's because I want them to read all three, one, two, and
well,
three.
me
You
too,
started
yeah.
it. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you named it one, two, and three. And so our seminar last month was on the first book, which is Growing a More Human Community, that growing me, becoming a child. I had to get the actual book. I had it on Kindle, but I need to be able to feel this and underline and circle things. And then today we're going to be focusing on growing us, becoming an adult. Joining us today will be two primary panelists, but then what we did is we offered our readers a chance to read the book, write a review on Amazon, and then some of those participants have been chosen to be with us today, where they get to engage with Dr. Wilder and the rest of the panel about things that they read in the book. So our primary panelist today will be Ed Corey. Ed, would you tell the people hi? He's president of Equipping Hearts for the Harvest.
Hi
And
there.
he said, hi, Ed. Thank you so much for joining us. You've been hanging around this house for a few decades. We won't say how many, but a little while, right?
Yes.
so thank you so much for joining us. And also joining us as a primary will be Hannah Plugstraw of Brine Knit Ministry. Hi, Hannah. So glad that you are with us.
I'm so glad to be here.
Good. She does a lot of ministry to Gen Zs, and we love the demographics of Gen Zers. So thank you for just agreeing to be with us on the panel. And so I'll be calling you back in a little bit, my dear friend. So thank you, Hannah. Good. So for everyone else, our mics are off, our cameras are off, and it's a very simple format today. As we engage, we're going to invite each one of the panelists to join the call and give them time with Dr. Wilder. They will stay on the call, and then others will, the other reviewers will be joining us to talk about what did they read and what struck them and impressed them. Maybe there's questions that they might have for Dr. Wilder, but all of that's available. What I'm offering to you guys is there is a chat box that if we have time, we already have the reviewers lined up, but if we have time towards the end, we might choose some of those comments that you have to actually read. So feel free if there's something that you've read. What we do ask is that if you start chatting, if you put something in the chat, that we're not just chatting back and forth, but we would stay focused on what's actually happening on the air. So Lord bless you guys. And so Jim, I'm going to give it to you first, and I'm going to ask you to talk to us about this second book, Growing Us, Becoming an Adult. What is it that you want readers to gain from this part 2 of the series?
You know, Marlene, that's really where the whole book started out, because we were trying to do some kind of rite of passage for adult men who felt like they never had become adults some way or another. And we found out, at first we just tried to, christen you a man, and that didn't work. I mean, men loved it and all that sort of stuff. But when we went back and checked with them, they said, well, I still don't feel like I can do man stuff. And so we started making a list then of what is it that really requires to become an adult. And we realized, oh, well, you have to have this child, the first book, all those things in order. And then when you start to be an adult, there's a whole new list of things you do. And it's still a growth stage. It's not like now I achieved whatever. And of course, the big crisis for all of them really came when they became parents. So the second major part of the adult stage was that, well, what does a father do? And I realized that when I went to graduate school and seminary and even professional training, I never had so much as one talk about what a father did. And we're not talking a course. We're talking not even one talk anywhere. It was like at that point there was absolutely nothing available other than fathers don't exasperate your children. And that was the entire sum of the thing, what does it mean to be a man and a father? Well, don't be exasperating. And while I still recommend that that's a good plan, if you want to function, it takes a little bit more than that going on. And so that's when we started collecting, what do we know about this and how does it work? And then as the generations have gone on since then, and it's been some time since we started, more and more people began to talk about adulting and how they didn't know how to do that. And so it went from the generation that I don't want to grow up and I want to always be a kid to, and I need to grow up and I don't know how to be an adult. So the crisis, the nature of how people think about it has changed, but the problem itself hasn't gone away. So if we actually look at the brain at age 13, it goes through this big change that your own identity basically steps into the background, and the identity of my group becomes more important than your own survival. And so this group identity, I realize, is almost untalked about in terms of maturity in America and in the church. So trying to discover and explain what does a group identity look like. I had to go back to my roots and growing up in South America in rural communities where group identity was very, very strong, and everybody, no one had to explain what it was. And how does that transfer to the current society we have? With the biggest indicator of whether it's working or not being whether we're growing hopeful girls. So that's sort of the canary in the mine, you might say. The first thing to go out of a society when you're not forming a good group identity is girls start feeling hopeless about life. That's going to be painful. So a lot about being a father and an adult has to do with how joyful do we make the relationships around us. And that's so trying to put all of that in one book and keep it small so that people could read it. At the time it was women would buy these books for their husbands and they'd sneak it on the bedstand, like, well, maybe he'll pick it up and look at it. But if it's thick, he won't. So make it thin. So that's how we ended up with 3 books instead of 1, just with that. And, then from that point on, everybody now wants an audio book, which we haven't got yet. So, but for those of us who still read,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're saying the book actually started from actually trying to answer that question, but
That is.
that was, but that originally this was a part of the first book. And so here we are years, decades later, and it is still a very valid question that this book gets to speak to men's hearts. Someone else says you're a man, but wait a minute, is that it? Who's going to tell me more?
And because of the other changes in society, I decided I had to expand it, even though I'm very reluctant to talk about what does it mean to be an adult woman as well. I had to say something more about that than I did originally, because now the question of how I become an adult has really spread to women as much as to men. Men were the first ones to find themselves in trouble. But the questions are spreading now. We're more and more confused as a culture.
Good. Well, thank you for including us in the rewrite of the book. Thank you.
So with trepidation.
Exactly. Well, we do want to hear more, and I'm going to invite Ed Corey, if you will join the call, And Ed, I'm just going to give you freedom here. You've read the book, and I know you have some thoughts, some comments, some questions. And so Ed, what say you?
Well, there are just some parts of the book that are so good they need to be framed someplace, honestly. Um, Jim, yeah, I can see it on Jim's wall right now, right behind his head there. The parts that I really, because I'm interested in leadership training and how do leaders grow and how do leaders do things they do in a way that are healthy.
Okay.
Um, I found some of the discussion about adult tasks,
Mm,
um, and then what a kind of the dying that goes on with being a father particularly helpful. Um, Jim's discussion of what happens when you get power, that if your identity is not strong enough, you will not be able to handle the power that is given you response in a way that's responsible, um, and will tend to be fear motivated instead of joy driven.
mm,
And his section on pseudo maturity, what it looks like when you're flying upside down, really describes that perfectly. If you want to know what that looks like, his discussion is bullet points of what this just what flying upside down maturity wise can look like. It's things like working really hard but with no satisfaction, taking care of everybody else but not yourself, um, afraid of upsetting people, um, and not meeting their expectations. Those are all the things that completely take the joy out of leading in ministry, but they're also symptoms of someone that really has not reached an adult level of maturity and is in a role trying to exercise power that they're not ready for. I thought this Jim's discussion of this was really, really strong. In terms of healthy attachments, Jim says, you cannot relax when I'm trying to impress. Um, there's something about me being busy trying to impress you that just comes across as icky on one level. Um, Immature people may feel flattered by that, but people that are a little bit healthier go, I can't rest. There's no quiet in this relationship. Um, and it leads to exhaustion for everybody involved in it. And then he talked about how joy and peace lead to healthy attachments. And kind of the thing where that leads is to a healthy, stable identity. Um, People have such a hard time getting their heads around the idea that our identity comes from our attachments. Identity in our culture seems to feel sometimes like, well, you just put it on and take it off like you're trying on clothes or something. But Jim does a great job of explaining why those things flow from joyful and quieting attachments. I love that part, Jim.
Hmm. Yeah, and we've had a chance to travel the world and do a little consulting together and uh, see that in all kinds of ministry situations, where people are actually trying to live up to some kind of a imposed identity.
Hmm.
That well, they imposed it on themselves, but people also reinforce that. Like, now you're the worship leaders. Do you remember being in Korea with that worship group that
Yes.
we suggested that they should be joyful, and they just got furious with us? Like, on top of
Yeah.
everything we have to do to lead worship, you're making us be joyful too? Is
Uh-huh.
there no end to your demands? I remember you got called a ninja because of the way you handled that.
I don't remember what I did.
Uh, yeah, we just had them talk about you had them talk about their relationships with their significant others and their
Uh,
children. And,
uh,
it, pretty soon the attachment point started making sense to them.
mhm.
And I thought that was very clever.
Well, I think for anybody that's interested in leading from an adult or parent level of maturity, you cannot afford to not read this book. You absolutely cannot, because all the crash and burns we're seeing around us, um, it's obviously people are failing to reach and maintain an adult level of maturity and have a healthy community around them. Um, I wonder how many people, I don't know what you think of this, Jim. I've never asked you this. How many people reach pretty close to an adult level of maturity, but they never form a healthy peer, um, a group identity of peers that would help sustain them through things? Um,
Well, I've at one point sort of concluded that the American male was a friendless person.
mhm,
You know, they very rarely had much more than, you know, if they had one or two friends that they would actually open up to, they were really rare. So the
mhm,
percentages of a working adult kind of group identity for men was very low. Women used to do better when they became mothers.
mhm.
The mothers would gather, but that even seems to be breaking apart now. So I don't know what the actual statistics were, but I think it is really very low.
I also felt like your comments about being you have an interesting sense of humor, but here's one of the things you wrote. To be a father is to give without expecting anything in return, and you talked about all the dying involved in that. I mean,
Hmm.
even part of the male brain prunes a bit
Yeah,
in
does
um,
die off. Hmm.
in preparation for that. Um, but you said without giving a life to a child, a father becomes a eunuch on a honeymoon, which I'm like, that's Jim. But it goes on to say it is the strain and effort, even in the failures in fathering, that the really best parts of a man are revealed, tested, and strengthened. There's
Hmm.
something about that struggle um, that can bring out the best part of you if you're working from starting with an adult level of maturity and growing into fathering.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
decent sized challenge, wouldn't you say?
It's a huge challenge, and it's well, I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's really hard if you have not attended to infant and child tasks and have not reached an adult level of maturity. I mean, that's a recipe for a big mess.
Yeah, that'll eat your lunch.
Yeah. And that's
Mm.
what we're finding here, guys, is that in society and even in our Christian arenas, no one has really been able to capture this maturity conversation the way it needs to be captured. And so for anybody who's watching our videos, like these books are valuable for you. These are the kind of books to keep, not just to read, but they get to stay on the shelf because they're filling in gaps of things that no one ever said to us. No one even knew how to say or how to teach us, how to move us into places of maturity. We know immaturity when we see it, and we do call it out. Oh, they're so immature. But what do we see, and how do we help them? And I love
Mhm.
that that's exactly what's happening it's in the book, especially this with an adult becoming an adult that I actually identify. I love when you spoke to the mothers who are raising boys on their own. So all of our single moms out there, there's a section in the book where he begins to talk about what our sons need. So there's some very valuable pieces in there. Well, I
Yeah,
think that.
and I want to
Go ahead.
thank Ed for letting me make you the lead example in the book, which you did actually long before I asked it. But when we first met you, the important thing is that we share power and include each other in our group identity. And the first thing, you know, I remember you doing was, well, here's my world, here's a place you can have in it, and making part of that group identity available. And, you know, our relationship grew from that particular point. And so uh, instead of, you know, being a challenge, well, who knows more or who's got the better performance or anything like that, it was like, where can I bring out the best in you? And and the other thing I like about it, isn't there a way that we can make everything we do fun?
Uh-huh. Yeah, if it's not fun, I'm not sure it's worth doing. I mean, I shouldn't say that probably, but there's got to be play involved in the task, or it's just a grind that with no reward.
See, that's the difference between flying upside down and flying right side up. And you're flying right
Yes.
side up, like, hey, we're flying upside
Uh-huh.
down. Everything's a grind. So,
Uh-huh.
Good.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ed. So that's where that comes from. Here we are in a senior meeting, and Jim Wilder's like, "Are we still having fun?" It's like, what is he talking about? So thank you. Now I get that. And we want to be flying upside the right side up. So let's invite Hannah to the conversation, gentlemen. And Hannah, would you come on? Hannah actually wrote a review as well. So Hannah, I will read your review. And this is what she wrote. This book is more than just good advice or helpful science. It is wisdom in the truest sense, written by an older man with decades of people experience, not only professionally, that too, but also in the real world with a variety of countries and religions. If you were ever wishing for a wise father or grandfather to show you the ropes of what it means to be an adult, how to mature into an adult, and where to find good training along the way, Jim Wilder is that person. The combination of brain science, of real world storytelling, and biblical values is refreshing and will open your mind to a ton of questions, conversations, and considerations you need to explore as you navigate or help others navigate the years, especially between 12 and 25, which is who you mainly minister to, right? Good. He's not going to coddle you. Jim shoots straight and hits right to the point where people this age need to understand what's going on. No preaching, no guilt trips, just straight up wisdom. I also strongly recommend reading volume 1 because before you dive into this one, but volume 2 stands alone if you just want to read one book. Highly recommend it. So welcome, Hannah, and I'll let you talk to us about any sections of the book that you want to engage with Dr. Wilder about.
Okay, I do have some, but I also just wanted to say that this, like you keep saying, this book sits on the shelf. I mean, it's one of a kind, and I just feel like that needs to be said, right? Because the Bible says, of the making of many books, there's no end, and I'm a writer. So I'm always thinking, like, is this book worth writing? Because there's already so much out there. But this, I mean, I really sincerely am saying that this book, there's nothing else like it. As you said before, we don't have people teaching us this. It resonates with me because I was one of the fortunate ones who did grow up in a community that felt to me as a child and as a young woman like a life-giving place. Not just my family, but my dad was a pastor. The churches that he led felt that way to me. I was a hopeful daughter. I saw men as people that cherished me and valued me, whether they were my uncles, my dad, my brothers, the men in the church. And so now I've raised 4 Gen Z kids, right? And tried as best I could with my husband to give them that too. And I'm finding as I walk with my children, we have 3 daughters and 1 son. And I'm finding as I walk with my children that you can give your kids these things, but if the larger community, be it your neighborhood, your church, or just the culture at large, is falling apart, like I think ours is, your kids, even if they've been given hope, it's real hard to hang on to it. And so that is what has led me to want to fight for the whole generation, not just my own 4, but for their friends as well, for the ones in my church. And I've been doing that for a while now. And now it's been long enough that I'm like, oh, they're not kids anymore. They're adults now. Like they are older than I was when I started having children. And they're telling me they're not ready. Like, the ones that I'm ministering to are telling me this. And so this book is helping me as a sort of like elder in training, as someone that's trying to grow this community and trying to feed into Gen Z in a healthy way, the way that I gave to my own children when they were little. It's just really helpful to be able to have a larger community like Life Model Works, Dr. Wilder, this book, and that sort of thing to help me do that, right? Because I'm not just in the 4 walls of my own home anymore. It's not just my own 4 biological children. So this is strongly recommended, again, for anyone that's trying to become an adult, but also for anyone that's trying to help people become adults. You really have to understand the way that God designed us to grow, or you're like the culture and even the church, even our like our belief system as Christians, the way it's been handed to us in Western Christianity, it doesn't come with the knowledge, that the information that we need in order to grow healthy families and healthy communities. It can't be done by just establishing rules. It can't be done through just morality. It can't be done just by like putting everybody in their role, and you know, and that's what we've largely been given. So this is going to tell you exactly the way people work. And it's really like more of a, I mean, it is brain science, but it very much is going to inform you the way that science is meant to inform you. Is like, this is how things work, guys. Like, you know, you can't get around that. It's not a product of our culture. It's not a product of our time. It's just a product of what God has made. And so the sooner we can all get in cooperation with the way that God has designed things and wants to see them go, the more we're going to see, you know, the sooner we're going to see change. And I'll say, like, this idea of hopeless girls, we're there. Again, I have 3 daughters, and the conversations we have around hopelessness are too frequent. And it's not because they're you know, in bad places. It's just it's what they're facing in the culture, and it's what they're being handed as young women. And so in my ministry, interestingly enough, the Lord has also called me to be very concerned about the men, because I can see through the lens of my daughters and what worries them. I can see that we all need to be fighting for the men their age. Mm-hmm. We all need to be fighting for young men. Young men need fathers and they need mothers. A lot of the issues that I see in young men stem back to motherhood issues. So the quote that I most wanted to ask Dr. Wilder about was on page 27. He says, it's the part you brought up, Marlene, where he's talking about single moms. Mm-hmm. And it says, mom can easily teach a young man about his heart, how to protect others from himself, and to see the effect he has on others. And I think that's really true, right? Because mm-hmm. as a woman, who better to reflect to my son, like the way his actions are affecting me. My dad gave me really, really good advice when our son Jack was 2. He said, never, ever forget that there's a man inside that little boy. And I know we understand it the other way, like there's a boy inside that man. But my dad pointed out when my son was 2, there's a man inside that boy, and he sees you already as a woman, right? So, mm-hmm. Oh man, that informed the way I mothered him. It informed the way I helped his sisters to show him respect and honor. And I think that it went a long way in the kind of man that my son is. So it's true, a mother can do a lot for her son. But then he also points out that, where does it say this? Let's see. Oh, because children may fear being controlled by single parents, they are more likely to resist instruction and try to make their own path. Just a little encouragement by mature men, or even a book like this one, will help these young men verify that their mother has them playing the right song. Now, I think this is important to bring to the surface because, yes, definitely, if there are single moms listening, like, you will be so encouraged to find out that life does not have to be perfect for things to work the way God wired them to work. Like, he just asks that we show up, you know, and things are going to work. They're not going to be perfect, but guess what? They never are anyways, right? But I also think that the church needs to hear this, because what I've found in my ministry, in my like calling to really pay attention to the young men and make myself available as a mother to those that need it. I like a single mother, I see the need for the church, the men in the church, to be a part of that. And it's kind of an uphill battle. And this is pointing out that there is a role for women to play as as young men, adulthood starts at 12, right? So that's not the time to suddenly be like, oh, now all they need is men in their lives. Like, this is actually the time for young men to start, as they're developing into puberty, they need women in their lives of all different ages and stages who can show them, like, this is how it feels to have a healthy relationship with a woman. But that doesn't work as well if there aren't men validating that, because a woman that's just inserting herself into the life of a young man is not is that's a scary place to be, like, for the community. It's like, what are you doing? This isn't what we do. But when you have healthy, mature men who are coming alongside and saying, like, no, in the context of this community, this is a good thing. We want this. So I don't know. I just felt that very validating. And I just wanted to know if Jim had more to say about that, because it just feels like the kind of thing that never gets said.
Well, there's a research study that just hit the press this last week about the differences between male and female brains, and their conclusion, which is more of a commentary than a scientific conclusion, is that we're not saying one is better than the others, but there's obvious evidence of specialization so that we can divide the roles that we have and get better at certain aspects of it. And, one thing I'd say about Hannah is, one of the reasons I had courage enough to write some things about women's maturity was that I had Hannah review all of that. And she sent me extensive notes and questions and upgrades about how I should do that. But she's one of the few people I've met that's not afraid of having mature relationships where men teach the young men and women how to be protectors instead of predators, and the women teach young men and women how to be protectors instead of predators, and the input from both sides, though a difference in style, is both needed if you want to have a fearless kind of environment, and so the problem is that the idea of gender and sexuality is approached with fear by most Christian communities. And so to say, it's powerful, but we don't have to be afraid of it. Let's invest the best of both sides in creating young adults who are able to relate to and take care of a community that includes both men and women. And that's good for generations and generations. So, the main thing is that, it does cause fear if people have never seen it before. And so to have this community where we can say, oh, but there's a higher calling here. So let's learn how to do it right instead of being afraid of all the ways that it could be done wrong by people who are flying upside down and lack the maturity to handle these things.
And I think, ironically, where we lost as a culture, where we lost the trust and the safety, the sense of safety, is right around the same time in history when we started talking about sexual liberation and people doing whatever they wanted, right? And
yeah, so let the predators free.
Right. So there, not too long ago in our history, I think people did feel a little safer. It's ironic to me, because I think we would say our time is a time of, like, no boundaries and anything goes, but it's also a time of great fear. And anyone who wants to see proper boundaries only really has an experience of setting up those boundaries in fear. And it's like, this book actually can show you how, wait, no, we do need boundaries, and there are right and wrong places to do this or that, or not places, but relationships, but also that can be done in joy. Like, that's meant to be done in a context of joy. So, talking about power, one of the things that the phrases that I've learned from you is this idea of shared power. And I think that Ed brought that up too. So I just, and so that can be talked about from, gender to gender. Also, it can be talked about from generation to generation. And as someone who is immersed in Gen Z, as they try their hardest to, some of them, to become adults, one of the frustrations I have as an advocate is watching them like not get a proper amount of power shared with them. And the way you describe it in the book is that like it's overseen, and it's you do it in a peer group, but I just even for someone in their mid-20s, they don't feel trusted, they don't feel empowered, they feel as much as everyone's kind of looking down their nose at Gen Z, sort of like, oh, when will they grow up? What I'm hearing is like, we can't, like, no one, we don't know how, but also when we try, no one trusts us. So I just wanted to get your feedback, any of you, like on how do you think we're doing, as especially within the body of Christ? How are we doing when it comes to that shared power? Particularly, I think in like a generational sense, like are we doing a good job of looking at Gen Z and seeing the next group of leaders, right here, they're here.
Yeah.
Well, my short comment on that would be that most people duplicate whatever happened in their own adolescence, because we're talking about this time. Adolescence is when you learn to share power, and very few parents and children share power. So they fight for control instead, as in terms of learning how to do that. And so we have this alternating. We'll let them do whatever they want. We'll make sure they only do what they're supposed to. We'll let them do anything they want. Shared power is really hard to come by with parents and adolescents because basically everyone's bad at it. But if we were to say we're bad at it and we're going to get better, there'd be an open door there with teaching that to young adults as well, and church leaders who do that are very rewarded by it. In fact, the areas of the church that are growing best are the ones where the adults, the older adults, are sharing power with the younger adults and saying, let's use your energy and enthusiasm to build our group identity.
Well, it sounds like, Hannah, for someone else who's ministering to Gen Zers, you found this book very resourceful then. And so, wow, that's incredible. Thank you. We're gonna bring on Jonathan, and so reviewers, you stay right where you are. And right now is where we're going to bring on the other reviewers from Amazon. And let me bring on Jonathan Nolasco first. Hi, Jonathan. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I want to read your review first, and then I'll let you just engage with Dr. Wilder and the team. I was first introduced to the ideas in this book when I bought and read Jim Wilder's Living with Men. I've read many books written for Christian men, but Living with Men stands out in a way it presents and describes the stages men must complete to become appropriately mature. I'm grateful that this book has been revised and expanded in a 3-part series, and have found volume 2, Becoming an Adult, particularly helpful. I'm a pastor in his early 30s who leads a small group of men ranging between 25 and 40 years of age. The concepts in this volume in particular have helped me provide a framework of maturity for the men in my group. We discuss and practice many of its ideas. This volume has helped me communicate the importance of building joy together, developing a strong group identity, using our power wisely, taking responsibility for our immaturity, living as protectors rather than predators, forming healthy attachments, rites of passage, telling stories, the importance of both healing and coaching, dealing with our pain, and how to give life as fathers and as single men. Thank you, Jonathan. So I will give you the floor for a minute. Those were all incredible things, and everything that he was listing, guys, are mentioned in the book. So Jonathan, what else would you have that you want to talk about this afternoon?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here, be able to discuss the book a bit more in depth. So as the review indicated, my context is I'm a pastor of a church, and I lead a group of men, about 12 of us, most of us in between 20s and 30s. And so I'm just curious how, obviously, I've been already trying to apply some of the content and ideas in the book in the context of our group, but I want to kind of take us to the next level. And so I actually purchased like 5 sets of the trilogy for leaders of the group and the men so we can kind of discuss and brainstorm and figure out how do we more intentionally integrate some of these ideas into our group, because our group, we're not a Bible study, we're not a book study necessarily, we're really committed to growing in our maturity. And so, yeah, my kind of general question initially is what advice, what suggestions would you have for a group like ours to engage with the material of this book, particularly the adult book volume, and just integrate it into the life of our community, not just in the context of our actual gatherings, but just the larger life that we share together. So, any advice around that would be appreciated.
Yeah, well, let me confirm something with you. First, Jonathan, you're the one that sent me the resources of all the men's books that you'd studied and compared. Is that right?
Yes, that was me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this whole project was stalled because I had to make a book proposal which did this literature comparison with all the other books in the field, and Jonathan contacted me and said, well, here's all the books I've studied, and I said, would you mind if I use this for a book, comparison for my book proposal? And because of his help, this actually got done. Got us through this barrier, because he's actually done a very, very good job of comparing between all the different resources available. And I guess what I would say, to go back to your question, is that I would want to inspire the creativity of the group of men that you're dealing with. Like, how would we actually implement this? How would we actually implement that? And be able to come back in a week or two and say, this is how it went. And when a group gets involved with saying, here's an idea, but here's how we're going to test it, that's when you actually start getting that kind of change. And it sounds like the men are committed to each other and to their communities enough that you would probably generate a better, like, study guide with exercises if you did it together than anything that could be done externally, because there's nothing like putting men's creativity, or people's creativity together and going like, well, let's make this work and test it. I particularly encourage people to say, let's go test it and let's come back and talk about everything that didn't work. Because people get into performance, if it's like, well, I got to make this work. Now, no, let's test it and find out what part didn't work, and then we'll improve that part. And when you do that, now you've got a decent kind of a fun task in front of you. Like, yeah, we'll see how far this will run.
It's helpful. Thank you.
Good. And it also keeps, with them talking about what didn't work, it keeps the vulnerability in the group as well, because that's sharing our weaknesses. I thought it was all that and a bag of chips, but it didn't work for me. And so we just bless you, my friend, as you engage with these men.
Thank you.
So good. Alrighty. Well, I've got another reviewer I want to invite, and Scott Rededal, we're going to invite you if you'll turn your camera on. And there he is. Hi, Scott. Welcome.
Hello.
Good.
Thanks.
Scott, let me read your review, and then I'm going to let you have the floor for a minute. This is a book that will continually speak to the reader through different seasons of life and will reward repeated readings. There's a lot of clinical wisdom and experience distilled into metaphors and stories that are fun to read. The content is weighty, but a wry sense of humor provides balance. I appreciated the author's discussion of the ways that people without children can function as parents within the community. I also like how he paints a rich picture of healthy masculinity and its effects, while acknowledging that female authors will be able to provide the most useful view of life-giving femininity. This book is accessible for a wide audience while providing deep and meaningful relational, scientific, and spiritual content. It addresses society's pressing need for a picture of how we can mature and become part of healthy communities. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the chance to be with you all. So a couple weeks ago, I was in a session with a client. My context was working with infants and toddlers and their parents or caregivers. And so there's a quote that's a pretty direct hit. It's page 91 in chapter 5. The dysfunctional family is one in which the adults try to be children while the children try to be adults. And so I was offering some support to a father who was feeling a lot of simultaneous pressures. And so I just started thinking about the maturity, the pseudo maturity checklist in particular. And so I was like, oh, okay, I know it's in there. Where is it? And I felt like the Holy Spirit led me right to chapter 5. I was like, oh, this is fantastic. So ticked down the list, and it was immensely helpful. And part of the reason why I could see it probably going on for another person is my own experience with it. And so a question that I have for you around this is, do you see a mixture of patterns of pseudo maturity and obvious immaturity, or do those things tend not to mix?
Yeah, I think there is a mixture, and it's typically a gradient that goes under pressure, so that you've got the pseudo maturity that's working for you until pressure hits, and pressure can be fatigue, it can be all kinds of other things, and then when that happens, then the obvious immaturity underneath collapses, because pseudomaturity is based on fear, and fear has a recency effect and a easily replaced effect, so that you anything you're afraid of will fade over time because it's been a while, and if a newer fear pops up, then the old one loses its interest. So as if you're performing out of fear, but a new threat shows up, you'll forget what you were doing and go do the new thing. Does that match your experience?
Yes, it does.
Have
That's
a
immensely
story that
helpful.
goes with that?
I would say, I'm reading books about relational maturity. I'm intentional about trying to foster that with families. And yesterday I came home after working. My wife is putting together dinner. I'm trying to get out the door to go to rehearsal. And I completely relationally ignored her and felt terrible about it. So yeah, I did notice that under pressure, maturity does recede for me. I can look like I have it together, but under pressure, might not be able to deliver the goods. It's, one of those kind of embarrassing realities of life that I'm facing.
Yeah, and we all are facing that one right there. But the thing that makes it interesting is that what feels like pressure to one person is not the same as another, depending on which of our relational skills happens to be getting stepped on. So the most common one being, what emotions are going with it. So, I have a harder time if it's a hopeless despair situation than I do if it's, a shame situation. Also have a little more trouble if it's an anger situation, so the pressure feels differently for me depending on what's going on. So if I walk into a situation and people are angry at me, I find that feels like a lot of pressure. Where if I walk into a situation, everybody's sad, it's like, oh, all right, we're all sad. So, okay, hugs for everybody.
It's also good to remember that returning to joy is a maturity skill as well. So just as we all fall off the rails, the real maturity, whatever level that we do possess, is going to help us more quickly. The quickness to which we return to joy and help everyone else around us come with us is also a sign of maturity. So that's encouraging.
I'm just astounded there could be a room full of people angry at Jim.
Well, sometimes I say things people don't want to hear.
Oh.
Okay, well, good. Thank you, Scott. Well, we're moving along here. If I may, guys, I'm going to go ahead and invite Scott. Thank you so much, and we'll be back. I'll get you back on in just a little bit. But let me move on to Bart. Bart Moyers, would you come on and join us?
Hello, everyone.
There you are. Hello, dear friend.
Hello. Great to be with you. I just want to say, Jim, wish I had these books to read years ago, as probably we all would say the same. But thank you so much for writing. And yeah, my story is a 63-year-old man not having a father figure in my life. He was a father with PTSD, World War II veteran. I'm reading this material like it's candy and highlighting. I don't think I've highlighted a book like this since college days. So there's so much good information here. Some overall quickies here are, the question, wouldn't you like to know how God made the brain? I mean, that's a great place to start there. You also mentioned throughout the book, 3/4 of all men live in an infant maturity level. And that's just, right in my face. So where am I? The one that I would frame and put in my office is the one-liner on page 114. It says, what do you think you'll be doing 500 years from now? And it was a thinker. It really did make me consider that perhaps the 70 or 80 years that God has put me on this earth, maybe that's not the end of the story. Maybe there's much more character to be built in eternity. And that was a real big help. Another overall for me was, I guess if I had a nickel for every time you use the phrase, we should be seeing everything through the eyes of heaven. I got that. You like a hammer to my head. I need to be seeing life that way. So those are the overalls. On page 20, you get into the rite of passage, which really is a big thing for me. I think what I wanted to do with my son is turn around and make sure that he had that experience. But interestingly enough, we've worked, my son and I, with a father-son camp. And before those fathers can help those sons become men, they need to become men themselves. And so that's a big question for me, how to help them through the 9 skills for getting through infancy, the earned skills. The reason to be a father, I think, was probably the highlight of the book for me, because in our age, there are many people who are wanting less and less to be a father. And in page 118, page 139, you speak of, this is a man's run for the roses. And others thought that is so well put. Single men was the last piece here. How to help single men in our ministry understand what it is to be a parent, even though they are not parents themselves biologically. Page 172. So my question that I have for you here to consider is, when we think about that rite of passage for the older men, for them to go to those 9 skills that need to be learned at the infant stage, let me just pick the first one. Can I quiet myself and feel comfortable in my body? Can you flesh that out just a little bit for us? What does that look like? How is that best taught or experienced? Can I quiet myself and feel comfortable in my body?
Yeah, that's actually the one that there's 2 kinds of quiet. There's one that's sort of designed to be learned from your mother's brain, and this is the one you're talking about. So it's actually best learned from engaging with women, if you have a chance. But most men don't know how to be quiet together with women. So the idea that we can actually just sit quietly together and look at something, take in the world. If you have somebody who will sit down with you, in the sunshine or something like that, and say, okay, we're going to just quietly take in the world. The closest men probably get is with fishing. You're not going to make any noise so that you're going to not scare the fish, but you got to stay a little bit active to do fishing, But that's that kind of experience that's usually found in nature. And I think that I know a little bit about you, and one thing you do is with this father-son camp, you take people out into nature for part of that experience, and that's, part of how you learn it. But one of the other things, I know you're writing a book right now about men's friendships. with, if I have it right, a story of sort of a classic story to illustrate each of the 19 brain skills as it's experienced by men. And so having those examples, if you get this book done, I think is also going to be helpful so that people can say, oh, here's what it would look like if a man did that sort of thing, because we're looking for male examples. And, if you have any man who knows how to do that and have him tell stories to the other men in your group, that's one of the most useful ways of spreading it. And, so I see you experimenting with that, and I commend that to you. So, um, thanks
Very
for
good.
what you're doing.
Thank you.
So good. What is interesting is that Dr. Wilder wrote the book, people wrote reviews. I just chose, reviewers, and then you get on a call, and then the man. I was like, wait a minute, what's the connection here? All this history that you guys have with Dr. Wilder, but we're almost out of time here today, guys, and so I'm just going to invite my other reviewers back on. Jonathan, Scott, show your faces for us, and guys, thank you for number one, reading through the book, and we've got part 3 coming. Thank you for writing the review and being with us today.
Anyone have a concluding remark that they're burning to say before we get off?
I have one. This was in response to something Hannah said that I thought was really, really good. She was talking about sharing power. And the thought I had with that is sharing power without having a healthy attachment just becomes a very fear-based endeavor, which would seem to me to undercut the whole process. I think part of what I've seen that not work is with an insecure leader trying to share power. It just ends up fear-based and all twisted. But I thought your comment was really, really good.
I'll say one thing that I appreciated in the book is hearing some of the history of how these things have come together, the story of the collaborations and the iterations, the things that were tried that weren't quite on. It's inspiring that we don't have to get this right the first time. We just have to get going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in response to Marlene's comment, that there's a network here of people and the ideas are flowing back and forth within them, so you get something like my book that comes out and it's sort of at the front of the parade, let's say, for the moment. But it didn't get there without this kind of a network of people exchanging what we're learning and doing with each other. And so, these are all authors of the book in their own way.
I think for me, I'm noticing now that we're all here. Marlene and I are the only 2 women. I just like, for anyone that's listening that hasn't read the book yet, I know you've heard a lot about how this book is about men. And it is a lot about, it is a lot about men, but as a woman, I just want to say, thank you for writing a book about men that's not just for men, but that's not just to men. My conviction is that if a society's men get completely taken out, we're all in trouble, and so we all need to understand what's at stake here. And this book really calls the whole community of men and women into that conversation, so that it's not just this overwhelming kind of man problem that is just well, the men need to go in there, close the doors, and figure out what to do about this. The women in your life have a lot to say about the men in your life, and that, the men that you care about. And so what I love so much about Dr. Wilder in general, and just my relationship with him and the books that he writes, is that he is offering a perspective that I think is just a lot healthier and more balanced and more natural, more the way that God intended when he created male and female together to have dominion. Like it just, I think that the drawing of lines where it's like, you know, this huge wall between the genders has just done so much damage in the body of Christ and in our society. So it is a lot about men, but we all need to care about the men because we all need the men. And I can speak for the girls. Like we want to see the men thriving. So yeah.
To paraphrase the old hymn, when we all work together, what a day of rejoicing that will be.
Yes.
Just sing that for us, please. Bart or Jonathan, any closing comments from you guys, and we'll close it out.
Just great to be with all you, and also just to glean your perspectives has been amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Grateful to be able to take a next step in this journey and to integrate it, to connect it with a larger community. I think that feels encouraging. And I think for me, one of the next steps is you talked about stories, Jim, and in the book and also in this webinar. And I feel like particularly inspired to integrate that more intentionally into the context of our group and how we mature and to really draw from elders who can offer those stories in their maturity journey. So I know you'll talk about that more in the next webinar and the third volume, but that's for me one of the next steps. Glad to be a part of it.
So let me ask Marlene, would you like to hear and collect these stories if they're available?
Yes, I would. Marlene.allen, lifemodelworks.org. But everybody here has my email address. So yes, we do. So thank you so much. I know Jennifer Cochran has been in the background and she's been answering some of the questions that's been coming in because she knows there won't be time for us to go through all of those. Jennifer, thank you so much for being in the background and taking care of all of us. You are a treasure. So let me just kind of close this out, guys, for just a little bit. We will do part 3 next month on February 7th, and we'll have Bishop Bill Atwood with us and Barbara Moon as we talk about Growing We the People, the 3rd book. And so you can purchase all the books on Amazon. But I also want you to take note that we will also be having our Transform 2025, April 10th through the 12th, and that's in Denver. Registration will open a week from today, so you can watch for that or early registration. But thank you guys for joining us, and hopefully everybody, if you only have one book, go out and finish your set and make sure you have all 3 and give some sets away is what you get to do. And so, Ed, I'm going to ask if you would close us in prayer, blessing our listeners today.
Sure.
Thank you.
Father, I thank you that maturity is your idea, that you planned this all along. I pray that you will inspire everybody that reads the book and all of us that heard on the webinar how first we can grow our own maturity, but second, how we can help the people around us grow their maturity and form community that's maturing and thriving. I pray that you will equip people with the maturity to love well. Yeah, just to love well, without fear and boldly. I pray that you will bless the book, and I pray that you keep putting it in the hands of people whose lives will be changed and influencers who will be able to bring it to people that need it. And I just thank you that you're so good. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. And so thank you guys for joining us. We're going to say farewell for today and hopefully see you next month, all of our viewers. Thank you for joining us. Hannah and Ed and Bart, Scott, Jonathan, and especially Dr. Wilder. Thank you guys so very much. And Lord bless you. And Happy New Year. Forgot to tell you guys Happy New Year. Let's take this and be our best selves in 2025. Okay. Thank you guys. Bye.